with developing racial equity and social justice learning content with inclusive and culturally sensitive considerations.
Thank you. Hi, everyone online. Hi, everyone in person. Thank you all for being here today. Hope you had a good lunch break, and I'm glad to see you here in this session this afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, big room. So yeah, my name is Niki Wong. I'm a product engineer at Esri on the Learn ArcGIS team. And today I'm going to share a little bit about my team's newly developed process for incorporating inclusivity and cultural sensitivity values into our GIS learning content. And just to give a little bit of background about how I ended up kind of taking on this project, prior to joining Esri, I spent 6 years as a grassroots community organizer, developing and providing public health education to a historically underserved community in South Los Angeles. My neighbors and friends, they're patiently taught me a lot of important perspectives that I didn't have before, and really helped inform the way that I contextualized educational information so that local community members could participate in improving public health policy that benefited their community. So now at Esri on the Learn team, a lot of those perspectives have really enabled me to develop GIS learning content that's welcoming and applicable to a wide range of experiences and backgrounds. So I'm really glad to be here today to share a little bit about the process that we developed and some of the things that we've learned along the way. Overall, today I'm going to share a little bit about why inclusivity and sensitivity, why things like tone and narrative matter for learning. Then I'll share about the process that our team underwent, and then I'll close with some recommendations and lessons learned. So I think for any learning content, especially when you think about something that's technical like GIS, a learning tutorial needs to have accurate technical information. You need to provide guidance. You need to have, demonstrate best practices. But there are soft aspects of the learning content that I think are just as important for that learning content to be well received. And for GIS workflows that especially involve like mapping and analyzing social or systemic challenges, and then subsequently, usually you're using GIS to try to identify possible solutions. The community of concern is going to be mentioned and discussed throughout that workflow description. And throughout that scenario, there's just tremendous value for ensuring that the way the impacted community and the challenge that's being investigated is described in a way that's really thoughtful, that's dignifying, that acknowledges the humanity of the impacted community beyond the circumstances that you're investigating. And something that's helped us frame how to define that and how to think about it more critically is asking a couple of questions. So one question you might ask about the narrative in your content is, what is the tone that you're using? Is there any chance that it is suggesting there's some inherent flaw with a community? Might it be overly emphasizing the societal burdens of an issue? Does it adequately express the complex realities of a situation? Does it empathize with the impacted community? I think another helpful question to ask is, whose perspective is this narrative being told from? I think it is most commonly I see the narrative being told from the perspective of an outside investigator, kind of looking in on this other community trying to fix their problems. But what if the narrative was written from the perspective of someone who's a local community member who wants to improve their own neighborhood? I think that really can change the tone and the narrative. And then most importantly, I think just thinking about the terms of the adjectives that are being used. What are they the kinds of words and adjectives that the impacted community would use to describe themselves and their reality? And then another reason I think inclusive narrative is really valuable is it just creates a welcoming space for learning. I like to think of thoughtfully written content as a form of hospitality. So when you think about having guests over at your house, you tidy it, you prepare snacks that your guests might like, you want them to feel comfortable, welcome in your space. I think learning content can have that same effect. When you take the time to use words and narratives that don't alienate specific groups of people, when the tone and the narrative takes into consideration the diverse range of experiences and backgrounds of those who might be taking your learning content, it just removes another barrier, a potential barrier for learning. So the Learn ArcGIS team set out a goal to develop a process to integrate questions like that into our lesson scenarios. And part of why we really wanted to emphasize that is in terms of all the different training material that's out there in the Esri world, ours are a little unique in that they are all scenario based. So that all of them have a story, all of them have some sort of end project you're working towards. And we wanted to collaborate with Esri's Racial Equity and Social Justice team, or ResJ team, to develop this process so that we could review all of our existing content and create a new structure for new content that's being proposed. So I kind of broke it down into 4 major components. We started with a content review of everything that we currently had. Then we worked to enhance and revise those existing content. Then to develop the new stuff, we developed a guidance document and established a review committee. And now we're currently in the 4th phase where our review committee continues to implement our values and goals for inclusivity and sensitivity. So to go into some detail and some examples, in our initial content review process, so I went through all 300 of our lessons, checked for them if they had a workflow that was related to racial equity, social justice, or vulnerable community. And I identified 15 of them that could benefit from enhancement or revision. So I'm using the term enhancement to describe a lesson that had an opportunity to take their workflow a little further. For example, there was a lesson that was involving mapping the rate of low birth weight babies born to Black mothers and white mothers. And that was kind of it, just the value. So the enhancement was to take it a step further and actually calculate a racial disparity measure. So I had the users calculate a rate ratio, which is a really common measure we use in public health to assess disparity. And the resulting map actually showed which counties had that racial disparity, which counties had a higher rate of Black mothers experiencing babies that were born with low birth weight compared to white mothers. So that's just one example. And then for lessons that had a more significant kind of overarching narrative or repeatedly used terminology that could be perceived as insensitive or tone deaf, I kind of categorized that as revision because it was just a little bit more involved to work through revising those. So one example of that is we had some lessons that were investigating the impact of people experiencing homelessness, like where they were in the city of Los Angeles, what were some of their characteristics and features and experiences. But throughout the narrative, a lot of the tone of it was really framing and focusing on the issue being a nuisance, even using the term burden. Descriptions like combating homelessness, like fighting the problem, kind of emphasizing the costs repeatedly. Things like that, I think just overemphasize a really complex challenge. And it was primarily written from the perspective of those who are housed. So we adjusted the narrative. We decided to integrate some more focus on the fact that the local government lacked robust housing policy to accommodate their community's needs. We switched out those terms to really focus on the opportunities to support, increasing access, trying to focus more on the solutions rather than the problems. Another good example I wanted to share too was we had a lesson that was around creating a really well-designed cartographic poster showing the US military bombing missions in Vietnam. So the narrative was really focused around creating a commemorative poster, really highlighted a lot of neat design principles for map making. But throughout the narrative, it didn't mention anything about how those bombs impacted families in Vietnam. And, depending on one's experience and one's background, the lesson may seem, like really harmless, just a lesson on American history. But to some families, it can be a really painful reminder of the trauma of war. And we ultimately decided the lesson was going to be completely written for a different scenario. So we changed the scenario. It's not related to war, but it still demonstrates a lot of really cool map making principles. So that process of identifying those lessons and then working through the enhancement and revision process, we wanted to have like a system for it that really integrated the original author and stakeholders to be involved in that process. Um, I spent a little long talking about this, so I'll try to move this along. But we wanted to include the author and the stakeholders in that process. So we established this workflow. And then out of that process, it really helped us identify what were the range of things that we wanted to consider in a guidance document going forward. It's available in my abstract in AutoCarto's website if you want to take a look at it, the sample of this guidance document. But establishing it created a way for us to show and give to potential authors, you know, this is what we're going to be looking for. We invite you to like look through these questions, think about these standards as you're writing your lesson, and what are opportunities you can integrate it into your writing. And we also established a review committee made up of Learn team members and ResJ members to review any new proposed lessons. We created a process to ensure that there was adequate opportunity to make sure like we were integrating these values at the onset of the development and not as an afterthought. So all the purple shows where the ResJ committee has opportunity to review proposal, give feedback, and then one more opportunity to kind of review the final version before it's published. I also wanted to share a little bit about, you know, the different kinds of responses we got from folks and what we did to address that. So some authors maybe at first were like, oh, I don't understand why we need to go through all of this. It feels like a lot of work. Is it really worth it? But they weren't like, you know, outright very strongly resistant. So if they're just sort of like unsure at first, I found that just having a conversation and laying out, you know, what might be at stake if the changes weren't made, like your lesson could be perceived as insensitive, for example. That really helped make the case for why changes would be beneficial. Also providing a sample revision draft of the lesson paragraphs and things like that also helped it be more readily acceptable. For those who had a stronger resistance to the suggested changes, I found that having a committee to help facilitate that discussion, having a group of folks to offer a diversity of perspectives often helped soften the discussion and kept it in that discussion space. But we also needed to be open sometimes. Yeah, there just wasn't agreement and we had to table further development of that learning content. But I'm glad to share that majority of authors that we worked with were very, very grateful for this added component in our process. They really saw that it added tremendous value to their learning content, and we're grateful to have like ResJ subject matter experts weigh in on it. So by doing that, we now have a really vetted set of learning content that we feel good about that we can share with others. Many of the rewritten lessons have been used in workshops and conferences and curriculum packages. It's enabled us to produce several new ResJ related learning content and also helped us vet proposals that weren't in line with the new standards. So to close with some recommendations, if this is something you want to implement into your curriculum or your organizations, I think these would be like kind of like my top 4 recommendations. So investing in cross-cultural awareness training and communication training goes a really long way. These topics can be challenging to have, and you know, everyone is on a different continuum in their journey of social consciousness. But just being able to have a productive conversation is really what enables it to move forward. So gaining some of those skills really, really helps. I don't know if you guys have heard of Crucial Conversations. A number of us on the ResJ team and Learn team have taken that course, and that's been helpful. I think developing a team specifically for ResJ dedicated to this focus also is really important, because just having that dedicated space for validation, discussion, and decision making related to such topics creates a space for support. Establishing the process up front makes it clear what expectations you have of others who are going to partner with you in this work. And most importantly, I think embodying and modeling a posture of learning is so important. It's a lifelong journey, and I think cultivating that culture of humility and openness and curiosity is what really enables this type of work to move forward effectively. So yeah, I want to thank you all. The link there will take you to some of those learning resources if you're interested in seeing our ResJ lessons that were rewritten and the new ones that have been developed. I will be over by the tables during the break if you want to chat more. I'd love to hear from you all if this is something you're interested or what you've been encountering. Really appreciate the conference theme because I think this is such an important topic. So thank you all.
Yeah, I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Okay, great.
If there are some.
Okay.
From this group or the virtual group, you.
Yes.
Thanks for excellent presentations.
Thank you.
I really like all of those resources. I'm curious about any, how to make them more actionable, and also like you provide a lot of resources, how to publicize us to make more people can be involved in that process.
Yeah, so those diagrams and the guidance document are all in my abstract. So I think everyone should have access to that right online in the AutoCarto abstract library that they have. So that's definitely available. And you're very welcome to contact me too. I'd be happy to like go into more detail about things. But yeah, I think the guidance document and terminology document that it also links to within it can be a good starting place. But really, it's like a process. It is pretty subjective. I could see what you mean by like, how do you really tangibly, implement it? But I think that's why it's so important to ensure you have like a diverse team with lots of different perspectives working with you. Yeah, I like to think of like when you have people from lots of different perspectives and backgrounds, you're looking at solving a problem from lots of angles. If everyone has the same experience, you're going to have blind spots. So having that diversity can kind of help you cover your bases more. Yeah. Sorry, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, hey.
I know Esri, when sharing, teaching and selling its various products to orgs, companies, etc., does a lot of helping to facilitate how to make maps or whatever.
Yeah.
This seems like something that would be great to include in that. Do you think Esri would like happily add it to that to also help share it with everybody who, is learning how to make maps or tell stories in maps? Because it seems like a great thing to add to that list.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's interesting because like, I think it feels a little blurry, right? Because it's like we're making maps, but this sort of like soft skill stuff, like, is that within the purview of making maps? I hear that a lot with like equity too. Like, should equity be like this extra thing you tack on, or should it just inherently be part of map making? And I would agree. I think it should be a fundamental part of it. In terms of like how to make it officially part of map making, I could recommend there is a training course on our training services site called Applying the Racial Equity Workflow to GIS. Maybe it's even to ArcGIS. But it's a really neat step-by-step workflow where you apply and map and analyze for racial equity, operationalize best practices, monitor your performance, and all the while in all those steps, engage the community. And I think that particular training workshop is the best example I've seen of what you're talking about, how to be thoughtful about when you're making maps, who are you including, who are you not including, how do you put that into consideration and do it in a way that is connected to the community.
Yeah, I've seen Clint give talks on
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I was just curious because it just seems like a great, alongside all here's the important parts of maps and data, here's also part of the ethics of cartography and data.
Yeah,
And like, even if it's just sharing the materials, it feels like it'd be good to do, which obviously, like, I know that you don't have the power to make that, but just to like say that.
Yeah, Yes, yeah, I mean, that's actually part of why I got asked by Esri to submit something to AutoCarto so that it'll live in the abstracts and it'll be a resource for other people to hopefully use and expand on. But yeah, Clint's great. I'm excited for his talk tomorrow.
Do we have any questions in the chat? Okay.
Okay.
Wonderful. All right. Well,
Thank
thanks, Nikki. Appreciate that. Great talk.